So, hello, and thanks for joining us for Pact. P is for Peter, that is me. ACD is for the lovely Miss Astronaut Cowboy Doctor, Master of Science over there. Help us out by subscribing on YouTube, Spotify, or favorite podcast service. Also leave comments and glowing reviews on Audible and Apple Podcasts. Most importantly, tell your friends. Help us keep the lights on by becoming a patron. Your monthly support gets you in the Discord server, gets you exclusive content, and you see some content before everyone else. With us today, the hosts of the Space Commune podcast and YouTube channel, Fox Green and Alex. I think probably primary place that I really just started interacting with you guys on was the NPO Industrial Complex video that you did about a year ago now.
Yep. Yeah, almost a year. I mean, the whole reason I kind of started making content on the internet on YouTube and why we do our podcast is just basically like a cope, because like the shit is like so fucked up here. Mm-hmm. Like we tried to do. You guys are
from Kingston.
We are here in Kingston, New York, in the Hudson Valley, which is about 2 hours north of New York City. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's pretty conservative, like out in the rural areas, but then like in the small cities, like we're a city of 20,000 people. We're like a tiny city. Mm-hmm. But it's like this concentration of like the most annoying, affluent, like liberals.
We're in the Mesopotamia of gentrified wokeness driven by nonprofits.
Yeah, exactly. But it took us a while to like understand what was happening, because like gentrification is a huge issue here, and we were sort of slowly learning about that, and we were doing sort of leftist organizing with like tenants union, a little bit with DSA, and like slowly but surely we realized like this person, Peter Buffett, funds all of this stuff. Mm-hmm. And you start to realize like the sabotaging that happens because of it. Maybe not even on a conscious level, but everyone here just like, it's like this competitive industry now of being like, you know, a woke socialist leftist person.
That sounds familiar.
It's the same thing as BreadTube. It's crazy. A lot of people
it's
are
like a town that is a BreadTube as a town.
Yeah. Everyone's like, oh, log off. I'm like, don't log off. The same shit's happening like everywhere. It's a problem everywhere.
All the grass that you can touch there, it's all bad too.
Yep.
Start a nonprofit to touch grass.
We're helping disadvantaged inner city children touch grass.
Yeah, that's the problem. Not their material needs, but just to touch grass.
Not even jokingly, like that kind of is the ethos of like the degrowth localism stuff, which I know I'm like skipping ahead here, but it is kind of
big jump, but I don't think you're wrong.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of the what we are here because of the concentration of one person's philanthropy. You know, in the video that Fox put out last year, we showed that this is the place where the most philanthropy from one person is coming in. There's only a couple other places in the whole country where it's like this. One is Warren Buffett's other son, Howard Buffett, out in Decatur, Illinois. He's doing like a conservative version of this out there. So he's like spent the same exact amount of money. He's doing farming. He's doing like localist revitalization stuff. But also he ran for sheriff in Decatur, Illinois, and he's actually the sheriff of the town there.
Oh my God.
I don't want to get political, but what the fuck is a sheriff?
Yeah, like the top cop.
Yeah, you have a revolver and the whole star. And
he's allowed to shoot anybody he wants.
Why we have sheriffs? Well, I mean, I understand why we do, but when you think about what it actually is in practices,
So Peter Buffett, though, is a little bit obsessed with you guys. Is it just from that video because you sort of shone a light on him, or is there more to it than that?
Well, what's funny is a big turning point for me in figuring all this shit out to like make that video was the Cooperation Jackson angle of it, because before I did all this research and knew all this stuff, you know, there's a local group on Facebook that has discussions about gentrification. And, you know, he participates in it a little bit. He's more of the like sit on the sidelines and observe kind of person, but he does participate somewhat. And lots of like affluent community members also, you know, important community members participate in this group. And it's all these, like I said, turbo liberals, or even just flat out libertarians. And they used to argue with me and Alex coming from a socialist perspective. And they'd be like, well, if socialism is so great, then like, where is a model where it has ever worked or whatever? Mm-hmm. And Alex and I would always bring up Cooperation Jackson as like, we thought that it was like this, we're like, they're doing such great stuff. They're like, it's black led, like they're doing mutual aid. They're like
land back,
regenerative, economic, they're all the buzzwords that I realize now are buzzwords. At the time I was like, whoa, it sounds like dope. And I went on their fucking radio. Like I went on the radio station several times to talk to different people, but
Radio Kingston.
Yes, Radio Kingston, and one group of hosts, two hosts that hosted this show called The Black Meta. Mm-hmm. They had me on, and I was talking about this place, Cooperation Jackson. I'm like, it's really cool, and they're like, wow. Well, I hope nothing bad happens to these people. I hope they don't get like, attacked by the police or like, shut down. I'm like, yeah, I know. So like, Alex is talking in this Facebook group. I'm going on the radio station. Buffett isn't saying anything about it. And I find out later through actually doing some organizing early last year for COVID. Mm-hmm. We're talking about working with Cooperation Jackson. And that's when I found out that I went on the website. I was like, I wonder, just for shits and giggles, like let's see if like there's any connection here. And they're like quite literally like a case study. Cooperation Jackson is a case study for the Novo Foundation. and that's why Callie Akuno has been to Kingston multiple times. This like little city that's like in the middle of nowhere, just this nothing city, and he comes here to give talks and stuff. Mm-hmm. I'm like, oh, this is a whole industry. These people who I thought were like these socialist leaders, they're really just funded by one of the richest people in the world.
Yeah.
And
not if you believe him.
right. Not him. It's his dad.
He controls one of the most influential and powerful foundations in the entire world. He himself is not a billionaire. He's merely a millionaire. So let's get that right.
I mean, if we believe him at face value anyway.
Right. He's a normal guy where like the Clintons stayed at his house in the 90s. And when he moved out of his mansion, they had to lift the roof off the house and use a crane to lift out his musical studio. Like, it's normal.
Normal everyday person
class things.
That's stuff that everybody has to deal with when they move. Like,
right.
If I could tell you the stories about how we've used cranes to lift the roofs off my houses, that I would
be here all day.
Peter, you're probably doing better than Peter Buffett is at this point.
I know.
You're probably more well off than he is.
Yeah. Class is all about your income at that moment.
Peter and I have obviously listened to and watched y'all's content, particularly this video. And I think what would be useful is just giving a little pitch of why we don't think that it's possible for the revolution to be funded, so to speak, by these wealthy individuals.
Yeah. I mean, we just have to ask ourselves, like, the struggles that we hear about, that we see on TV, that we read about online, why do they make it to us? What about those struggles are appealing to the media or acceptable to the media, and who's funding the media that gets the struggles to us? So, for example, like there's things like Cooperation Jackson or the Dakota Access Pipeline, Moms for Housing out in Oakland. We hear about these struggles every year, and we hear about them on shows like Democracy Now! Or maybe Good Positive Leftist News or something like that. And we're like, why do these, how can we, like, that's a real thing.
I forgot that existed.
I didn't know that existed.
Yeah. So we have to ask ourselves, like, why do these struggles make it to us? And like, can we actually do them in our communities? Because isn't that the whole point, is like, we want to hear, we want to be inspired, and then we want to go out and like connect with our local working class comrades and fight capital and push back capital and build these alternative structures, in good faith. That's what we're all about, right? So you have to start questioning, though, like, well, why are we hearing about these things? So Cooperation Jackson is one of those things where it's like, it's in theory, it sounds great. It's this like black-led cooperative economy, community land trusts, all this stuff. But in actuality, it wouldn't be possible. We wouldn't be hearing about it. It wouldn't be on the scale that it's at unless it received millions and millions of dollars from foundations, which are run by either the richest people in the world or the offspring of the richest people in the world. And that's where it all starts. It's like, if we are like, this thing is supposed to be this socialism or this revolutionary stuff, it's supposed to be something that we all can do in our community. But if we're not told how it works, if we're not told like how the authorship of these things happens, then we're just receiving like copium. We're receiving, stories that make us go to sleep well at night, but we can't actually do them ourselves in our own communities.
I think also, to sort of answer your question kind of more directly, the guy in the video who's like, we'll take the money and then we'll string them up the next day. It's like, that's what everyone thinks they're going to do, that they're going to take like the capitalist money, but they're not going to get, when I have the money, I'm going to turn around and I'm going to use it for socialism. And that's not how it works. Like, first of all, like most people, when they take money, they're not going to like turn around and like kill the person. They're not like mobsters. Like most people who are most normal people are just like nice. And they're like, oh, you gave me money. That's nice. And if they did start to do that, then they'd get murdered.
They get murdered, or their funding would be pulled. I mean,
yeah, exactly. Peter Buffett is not going to give out a meaningful enough amount of money that that organization or person doesn't need money ever again. They're going to give enough for like the next fiscal period, and therefore there's going to be a sort of a need established to not piss off Peter Buffett and the Novo Foundation.
Literally nurturing dependence.
Yes. It's
that's
the end from the dentist system.
And also to be clear, like in the world of philanthropy, he is seen as like the absolute best in the business. So he's critiqued philanthropy. He's in the foreword of the book called Decolonizing Wealth. So he's at absolutely the cutting edge of like the best woke philanthropy.
Yeah, when you say best and most woke, it's like the furthest left. If there was going to be like a socialist billionaire, like he's probably as close as you could get.
The absolute best case scenario. And like many people who are maybe watching this later, if you look up like Anand Giridharadas or thought leaders like that who critique philanthropy, their job is to get to the absolute edge, but not go over it. So
I know all about it.
We've talked about him before on here too. And one of the things that you said, Alex, that I want to circle back to a little bit is that this facade of individuals being able to just sort of use this collectivist ideology at a very local level and just, the things that we could do ourselves, obfuscating the backing of this as being rooted in institutional power dynamics and the systemic inequities that we see in funding these things. They're lying to us and basically giving us, like you said, copium, and that we can individually enact this change and then we can just kind of live off of that pursuit or hope, when in actuality that can't happen unless we're being funded by these systemic influences.
I mean, I think it's really popular right now that everyone is like, all of a sudden is like, yeah, capitalism is bad. It's like kind of becoming mainstream.
Well, now it's a market.
Yeah.
I mean, what are we doing right now?
No.
Well, yeah. And you can look at like, I don't want to just single out Black Lives Matter, but it's the most prominent one. But a lot of these movements, corporations, banks, politicians, consultants, think tanks are all getting behind anti-capitalism on some level. On some level, they're saying capitalism isn't serving us. We need to put people before profits. And they leave it very vague. They don't say what they actually want, because what they want, in general, like if you look at the poo-poo platter of what's coming next, there's the Great Reset, which sounds really scary. There's the Green New Deal. There's just transition. There's degrowth. It's this poo-poo platter of things that none of them are, we're going to give all the power to the people and collective ownership. All of it is the same people that have been in charge are still going to be in charge, and they're going to mete out and like make some changes around the margins and make things fair, make you feel better, but it's not really giving power to like the masses.
Again, I think this MPO industrial complex paired with this idea that is often underpinned by a lot of MPOs of degrowth, they contribute to this facade of individual activism or individual choices as being the ultimate unit of driving revolution. And that's how we can get what we want. So what a great, ideology to sort of attach yourself to as a billionaire, where you can ostensibly be for the people, but know that this individual action at this microcosmic level isn't going to work, and you're still the one in power given the system.
Well, you get all these people hyped up and they're like, I'm gonna go out and change the world. But like an individual with no power going out and like buying a different thing or saying a different word, like, doesn't change anything. Maybe they don't know that. I don't know. Maybe they think that the market actually works as purported. Maybe they think that demand somehow simplistically drives supply. I doubt that. I feel
maybe they're market socialists.
Exactly. But I doubt that. I feel like they probably do know on some level that that's not how the market works, and that they're using the market to plan the economy, more or less. So this ideology of degrowth.
The thing about degrowth is it's one of those things that actually doesn't have a very specific definition. Like, there's ideas that kind of like float around. Some people will have a very precise definition. The people who defend it will have a very sort of precise, this is how degrowth is supposed to work kind of thing. This is our version of it. And it includes, reparations, and it includes, redistribution, and it includes the kitchen sink. But really what it revolves around is the idea of like economic output, throughput, I think is the word that they always use. And this idea that we are just creating too much.
Of course.
There's like too much stuff, and that we on the consumer end of it can do our part by kind of like capping how we behave as consumers to solve the world's problems, which sounds so ridiculous, like when I say it, but
it's underpinned by these neo-Malthusian dynamics in which you kind of have this sort of overpopulation narrative underpinned the back of that, this idea that there are not enough resources in the world to support it. There very much are, which again, that is a very convenient narrative for a billionaire to have in this very woke, marketable socialist ideology that they have to optically look good and for the people. While it may be intentionally or not, I can't say these intentions for an individual like Peter Buffett or what have you, but that they are obfuscating the power that they have.
Well, and they're taking the heat off of themselves. They're saying, "Oh, it's all foreclosed on, that we cannot change like the economic system of capitalism, for better or worse terms."
Well, they want post-capitalism, but they still want market exchange, and they still want to own all the things that they have. So what is
it's so on their terms?
Whatever we're transitioning to, because I think that Peter Buffett will often say that he's anti-capitalist. He funds all these like socialist things, but that's because I think they're all preparing for the end of capitalism, because they know that we're transitioning to something else where it's not like better than capitalism. It's actually kind of probably worse than capitalism, because the regular people, we just have less and less say. And it's we're transitioning into more of a feudalist type society, because the concentration of wealth is so immense at the top. And there's really no way. That's why it's like, it can feel kind of like nihilistic to come to terms with the reality as somebody who's like a leftist, because what the fuck can you do? Like, it seems like any direction you go in, you hit a wall because of the situation we're in, the dynamics, the extreme stratification of wealth and control. And then, there's this layer of like the PMC folks who kind of like guard that, that sort of like...
They're janitors. They're
they're jannies.
Class janitors.
But yeah, it's, I guess like the main thing with degrowth is, so on the degrowth website, degrowth.info. The thing is, like, you can get different information everywhere. The thing is, like, it's all framed around economic growth. The reason why capitalism is bad is because it's all about growth, which obviously is bullshit. Like if you learn, anything about like Marx and whatever, you learn that it's not about economic growth. That's not the problem. It's about the relationship to the means of production. Like
Exactly.
the growing part is not like the problem.
Right.
No. And inevitably, like as science progresses, as society progresses, technology, all those types of things are going to generate new forms, new things that are created. It's inevitable. Like society is going to grow. That's going to happen whether it's feudalism, whether it's capitalism, whether it's communism, whether it's whatever. It doesn't even matter.
Right. I mean, it's kind of like the Plato's cave allegory where, we as normal people, we're just seeing shadows on the wall and we're reacting to them. And many people today are like, oh, well, the problem is that, 150 years ago, we could have gone outside and we could have just gone to an open plot of land and started farming it, and it would have been our land. And that's the problem. We need to go back to that.
Yeah.
The problem is the technology today. People are on their phones too many hours a day. And or the problem is that, there's too much electricity. From certain hours of the day, we shouldn't have any electricity. We should just be like working the land to like farm a potato or something. Return to Monkey. And, and that's the people that are holding all the resources are like pumping money into NGOs, into academia, into the media to give us these ideas. But the fact is that like Lee Phillips, who's a Marxist guy who has a lot of great opinions about nuclear and about energy, great analysis. His best quote is, we don't need to shut off the machines. We need to take over the machines.
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
And that's the problem. And so when we talk about degrowth, it's a very compatible narrative to what the elites want anyway. The elites want degrowth. The elites want to stabilize the earth because it'll be easier to control everybody. If everyone has like just enough to not revolt and to start setting shit on fire, then they maintain their control. We just don't want to be doing the work for free for these people to say like, yeah, you're right. We do need to degrow the economy. And I know my version of it has redistribution in it, but obviously I have no power to like force you to redistribute your wealth. So, I'll go along with it. And that's kind of like the whole, how it all ties in together.
Well, that's kind of the justifying ideology. They put out this sort of like, I'm sure it probably comes from the same people, this version of degrowth that has redistribution in it. I'm sure it's probably seeded by all the same people. You get the same kind of ideology. It's just you're going to see it talked about by, ostensibly left-wing organizations or influencers. Like there was that Thought Slime video where we're talking about the path forward is either austerity or degrowth.
Or Naomi Klein, the DSA just hosted an event with her, and she's a big degrowth influencer, right, Alex? Am I getting that correct?
Yep.
Which sucks because the Shock Doctrine is such a good book.
Shock Doctrine.
She can't apply the analysis. She got up to the edge, though. But she can't apply it to what's going on now.
You got it. That's exactly it. Because it's literally like an instance of the shock doctrine in existence as taking advantage of climate change to enact a more exploitative economic paradigm than what was previously there.
Well, and I think to take it back to what we were talking about before is that this is what happens is if somebody has like this good analysis, and then they get plucked up and then it's like, oh, we want to fund you to do X, Y, and Z. All of a sudden they either turn down the money or their messaging gets changed and they get, subsumed into the machine and then, they just become, they get rolled into the blob.
One of the things that, Peter, you had just reminded me of was the role of climate change in all of this and how, this movement sort of not capitalizes on, well, maybe our acknowledgement, our recognition that climate change is a serious problem. And how do we, in opposing degrowth activists, indicate that is not the conduit by which we resolve climate change? I can imagine somebody saying, but don't we need to produce less because of climate?
Right. It's kind of like that that chick that went like viral where she was like, can we think about that later, champ, when there isn't a fascist in the White House, champ.
There's a fascist. There's a fascist. It's a fascist.
Yeah, that's like the same thing, right? It's like,
too.
yeah, okay, like climate change is probably like a thing that we have to deal with, but I mean, we don't actually have a say in any of that shit. So to think that like, oh well, we're gonna just do our version of degrowth, like, no, we're not in control of like what.
No, the
what
version
happens.
that will happen will be the billionaire one.
Yeah.
Right. And if anybody, in good faith, like anybody who's ever knocked on a door or something like that, gone into a working class neighborhood, tried to like talk about a political program. Can you imagine like going into a trailer park or to a working class neighborhood and being like, y'all have a lot of privilege because every baby that we produce, this is a literal thing that they say, every baby that we produce here in the industrialized West consumes 48 times more energy than a baby in the global South. So y'all need to think about that.
Oh my God.
So like, how are we going to build the mass of like, of people that can like actually confront capital? And
the thing that pisses me off so much about that is that it's so easily like connectable to the whole overpopulation and Malthusian argument.
Yeah, I mean, that was my immediate thought.
Because you're literally quantifying the amount of energy that like a birth causes, and it's like, what is the point of that? And then the other thing is like the amount of energy that the average person in the United States actually uses during the course of their lifetime is so much lower than the median, for one, because you have at the high end people who are consuming significantly more. But like that separation is so much more significant than the lowest like American compared to the lowest, let's say, Argentinian or African or whatever.
This is the next level of privilege politics. That's all it is. This is like the next step. It's like circling back to that like starving child in Africa argument and like merging all of it into like the privilege politics and saying like, oh, well, there are starving children in Africa, so you should turn your lights off and you're a bad person and you're consuming all this. You're a bad consumer. Like, you need to do your part to save the world.
I really like that analogy. It's your Catholic mother saying, waste not, want not.
Yeah.
A child your age is starving in Africa when you not eating some of your food is in no way going to affect those dynamics in any way.
Yeah.
It's literally all about you and how guilty you're supposed to feel and how you're supposed to act.
Or if you have a Jewish mother, your Jewish mother is like, oh, you have 3 kilowatts of energy there. A child in China could mine a whole Bitcoin with that energy. You're not doing anything with it.
Oh my God.
My mom's Jewish, so I can say that. But
Alex's clearance.
I'm saying it from experience.
In any case, what I was going to say also is that the separation between a child born in the North versus the global South is negligible or so much smaller than the difference between a birth in the North compared to the consumption of the 100 corporations that are responsible for 71% of carbon.
Exactly. That's such a pertinent statistic to bring up too when we're talking about climate change, because it shows where the actual power is. Like, you can convince as many people as you want that climate change is real, and not one of them has any control over what those 100 corporations do.
I'll say though, I think a lot of people misuse that. I don't think you did, but I think some people misuse that statistic to imply that if we broke up those corporations, that those emissions and that pollution would just disappear. No. I mean, these are economies of scale that actually, if we were to control them and if we were to take them over, we can really make them work for us and do a lot of good.
That's actually really helpful. And I think kind of gets at my question of what I was saying before and using that as a justification in degrowth. Well, don't we have to just kind of scale back where our corporate production, and if they're producing that, how do we avoid that same thing without degrowing our economy? That's a really good point, I think, for anybody curious about this, and for me.
Well, there's a lot of agreeable notions with degrowth and localism, because obviously, like, we all believe, like, oh, well, I can wrap my head around local production. If we made all of our local stuff right here, and we just, it was just me, and I was walking down the street to get a locally made vacuum cleaner, and then I went to the local lithium mine and got the lithium that I need for my solar panels. That's what people, that's like the extension of it. We don't think about where our stuff comes from.
No.
These economies of scale to make these localist lifestyles possible are actually critical to like import things from other places. And I think people don't think about that. If everywhere was to localize, we'd end up using so much more energy and so much more pollution than we are right now with like
absolutely
economies of scale. Not to keep promoting Lee Phillips, but he wrote a book called United States of Walmart that talks about this exact thing, that like we can take over Walmart's logistics if we actually built the power to do it. Obviously, we don't have the power to do that, but that's like what we could do, maybe,
I really wanted to get into this Ishmael book because I feel like it's really informative as to what all of this is. It really does like push you away from talking about anything rational and systemic and grounded in any way. Could you just summarize what this book is for everybody?
It's about a telepathic gorilla that blossoms under the care of a philanthropic billionaire that comes across the gorilla. And the book is just about this gorilla just spitting truths to the philanthropic billionaire about how we should all live, how the gorilla, in the gorilla society, they know the truth about how we should live, where, some people are takers and they just take from the earth, and other people are givers and they're giving back to the earth. So there's actually a movie version of this from 1999. It's called Instinct. It stars Anthony Hopkins, Cuba Gooding Jr., Donald Sutherland, among others. And it's a very loose adaptation of the book, but basically it's like Anthony Hopkins is this professor who goes into Africa, lives among the gorillas, and then becomes an eco-terrorist, starts blowing shit up. And then he gets deported from Africa and he comes back to the United States and he's in prison. And then he like starts fucking shit up in prison and becomes a huge problem. And Cuba Gooding Jr. is like a psychologist who works with him. And then Anthony, I don't want to spoil the whole
Alex
movie,
really liked the movie.
It was pretty funny, yeah.
He likes really terrible movies, like the Room, and
lighting up.
Yeah. There's a lot more animation. There's a lot more pep in your step.
Yeah, I'm usually pretty low energy until I start talking about that movie. But the work of Ishmael and the work of Daniel Quinn, it is used in the degrowth movement. It's kind of a Fox said like Dianetics. It's kind of like a Bible for degrowth people, where if you get into an argument sometimes about like overpopulation, people will DM you and like offer to mail you a copy of Ishmael because it like changes people's lives to read this book.
It's the only book you'll ever need. They're all the only book you'll ever need.
Yeah, self-help. It's
even Scientology and degrowth, like these are ideologies, these are theories of change that don't involve the average working class person. When we think about like maybe what made us all fall in love with Bernie Sanders was like this idea that we're going to take back our country from the elites, and Trump ended up winning on that sentiment somewhat. But this idea that we're going to like the working class is going to rise up and take back the country and do justice, do things that are good for the majority of people. And degrowth is an ideology where it's mostly like academics and people in the upper echelons of society, some billionaires, some the CEOs of companies, powerful, influential people talking to each other about this is something that we need to impose on the working class, and we need to give them this canon of stories and of ideas that like this is what indigenous people want, this is how you're supposed to live, this is your natural disposition to have to work the land and not own anything. This is a theory of change that is imposed on us. It's not something that's originating from the working class.
Well, the working class
I think the authorship
is bad.
Is important.
It's white people who all hate. They hate everything. Like they hate black people. They hate indigenous people. They hate all.
And to tie it back to like our origin story with this stuff is like we learned about this ideology because it's being imposed in our community. It's not being authored by the working class of our community. It's being imposed by elites that moved here that want to do an experiment to say like, oh, well, we can implement this here, and then we can implement it in other places too.
Yeah, and it essentializes indigenous people And it's the noble savage trope of like, oh, they know how to treat the world better. There's the takers and the leavers. That's the ideology, is that we're takers and the indigenous people, the like noble savages, are all the leavers, and they know how to steward the earth. And
they don't know anything about, like, they don't know those book smarts, and they sure don't know that technology. But man, oh man, do those noble savages out there know how to live?
Yeah.
Right.
As a monolithic
Yeah.
entity.
They know how to touch grass. That's
they are experts in touching grass.
Yeah.
The traditional
Yeah.
knowledge of touching grass.
Yeah, but and to tie it back to like the NGO, MPIC stuff, this is the problem with philanthropy and with that mode of organizing, is that, like I said before, certain stories, certain voices get amplified, and they're presented as the monolithic representatives of the entire group.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what happens. I don't want to just single out Black Lives Matter. Every single NGO that you can think of that's like a national organization is positioned as the voice of that community, when in fact those communities are incredibly diverse. They have incredibly different motivations, and communities where they have, controversial like clashes against people of the same group, because everyone's different. Everyone's an individual. And like we're linked, I would say, more by our class than by our identity or the whatever email list that we belong to.
How dare
for
you,
an NGO.
Alex.
Red,
How dare you.
brown, red, brown.
Well, from the perspective of a health disparities or health inequity researcher, your analogy, Alex, was so powerful. And like, could you imagine like going door to door in a trailer park and talking about, how privileged you are, how you're over consuming these types of things. And I work with individuals who are particularly susceptible to health inequities because of the limited resources that they have. And just, that is not the priority of any normal working class person. It's to put bread on the table, to feed their families, to get childcare, to have transportation, to be able to take sick leave when their child's sick. It's none of this other shit is inherent to the working class life.
We just recorded a podcast a few weeks ago with a guy named Matt Huber, who's he's a DSA guy, Jacobin writer, and he's one of the few people in that group who is anti-degrowth, and he gets a ton of shit on Twitter. He's very like nice, and like he gets along with all those people, but they always war with him. Like all the degrowth influencers war with him, and they've come into my mentions before too. Like I think that they just have like they're ready to just defend.
Probably
that.
have alerts set up on like a degrowth.
Yeah, this is like a something that. It really is like a big fandom. I knew that we would get some people coming out of the woodwork when we put this episode out. And it's actually our most listened to episode. Peter, your episode was our most listened to episode by far. Nice. But we blew past that with the degrowth episode because people are
excellent.
Just hate listening to it.
Excellent.
Yeah. So there's this one
So
guy.
what you've learned from that, though, is that all you have to do is get somebody that has a hate following onto your podcast, and it will get you your most.
It's not even him. He's well respected and liked by all the degrowth people because they're all colleagues. They thought we were the assholes, though. They're like, who are So the main guy, who's like one of these big degrowth influencers, of course he came at me. He wrote a blog post that was like a retort to our podcast episode. And he's like, Matt Huber's work is very good. The podcast was very poor otherwise, though. It's like, of course we don't understand degrowth. That was the whole argument too.
Of course you don't understand it.
But there was a passage from his blog post that was so mind-blowing. Like, I just want to read this passage because it's like, this is one of the top influencers from the degrowth movement who's paid to like speak at events, and like he's a thought leader. So The heading is, let's not stamp out on the seeds of utopian tomorrows.
Oh, we love the word utopia here, for one.
Bike repair cafes and communal gardens don't solve problems for people who struggle to pay rent, they say. maybe, but using
They say.
yeah, that's what we said on our podcast. Maybe, but using the same logic, housing cooperatives don't solve the problems for people who struggle to fix their bikes. Needs are diverse. What these initiatives have in common is that they satisfy needs outside of the money-obsessed capitalist sphere. Being able to fix my computer at the repair cafe protects me against the predatory practices of tech companies who profit out of planned obsolescence. As marginal as they seem today, these practices are sending a strong post-capitalist message. No one should depend on money to access the goods and services essential to the enjoyment of human rights. It's so delusional. I'm like, I cannot believe like this is what these people believe. They think that going to a repair cafe is sending a message to
You're
capitalists.
really sticking it to the class struggle.
Yeah.
Oh shit. They're not going to buy a new bike today? Fuck.
It's like so
Capitalism is over. No.
It shows the ideology of these people. It's a consumer movement.
It is.
Yeah.
It's like a green consumer activity.
Yeah. And no matter where you live, like there's environmentalists who are saying like every day you can go into your life and make it a habit to do sustainable activities and to consume better and to repair your bike instead of getting a new one and to, bring a reusable bag to the store instead of a plastic bag and acting like it's individualizing these global problems.
There's that altruism, and then there's that initiative and need and want to help people. And if you're in a more privileged position, you have that same drive to make it so that people can have equitable outcomes, and then morally you feel good if you're supporting this thing that has been sold to you ideologically as affecting those things when it can't.
100.
Now imagine trying to like shatter that and say, you know what, you donated, but actually it's not that great. Then people really get defensive.
Yeah.
That's like religion. People are, a lot of liberals like to think that they're like above religion, but I think it's still baked into how we operate as human beings. Like people want to feel that kind of sense of like morality and whatnot. And
Well, they also want to be the goodest and most right, or the rightest and the moralist. Like I said to Movie Bob when he got in my mentions.
I'm telling you, every single person that like I retweet or like interact with, that motherfucker just gets up in their shit.
Yes, that's probably how I got the Movie Bob virus. And now like anyone who I interact with, now I'm like a carrier and I spread it to everyone else. It's like random people who are like, just like, barely any followers, like mutuals of mine, they'll be like, why is Movie Bob like quote tweeting me? I'm like, sorry, my fault. Well, just get ready because this is going to be the new thing on the left. This is going to be
coming.
Apparently, Saxon's talking about it. Yeah. I'm ready to watch that video, but I'm afraid that it will be just too insufferable for me.
Yeah. Well, see, the thing is you end up having to choose between austerity or austerity. That's the end of that video. That's the point of that.
Green austerity.
Yeah, green austerity. I mean, austerity is austerity.
Voluntary austerity, too, I'd say.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to paint all anarchists with this brush, but it's very tied in with this idea of voluntarism, mutual aid, and like what ends up happening in practice is that we end up enabling austerity because we make do. Country boys make do.
Individualizing and atomizing from one another. It's individual authoritarianism. Anytime I hear an anarchist akin to the likes of Thought Slime talk for longer than a few seconds, I become that meme of like the kid at the desk with like the vein popping out of his head and neck, and I just don't know if it's safe for me.
Yeah. And I mean, shout out to like the cool anarchists. There are like 5 of them out there.
Yeah.
I mean, you can liken it to anarchism, but it's really ultimately just the justifying ideology that's going on here. It's some diversion to keep you away from seeking a program to get to a stage in which this class society doesn't exist in the way that it does now. Some sort of fundamental change that actually does empower the majority of people, including, the diverse working class, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah. You know, thinking about all this stuff we've been talking about, how this is going to be like the new wave of like, you know, leftism. It reminds me of that article that I found like a few months ago in the New Republic about how like people shouldn't eat meat anymore or something like that.
Oh, yeah.
I gotta look it up.
It was
title.
purely about like the morality of it.
Yeah. Let me look that up. New Republic. Oh, the sadism. There it is. The sadism of eating real meat over lab meat.
Yeah, that one.
Peter and I covered the sadism of eating meat in one of our streams, and
you did.
Yeah.
Just the verbiage of it was so, it was unhinged, and that I was saying
It is. It's
you're eating meat because like deep down you relish in the killing of a live being, basically. If you eat that while lab meat initiatives are happening right now, when that's clearly not the mode of production that our society is operating on at large. It was insane. That
it's all shifting towards like consumer choices. That's the direction
always
going in.
It's like the astronaut looking at the world, and it always has been, but it is.
Yeah, and I think it's just been ramping up and up. And we just talked to Caleb. Caleb Maupin, who is like an encyclopedia when it comes to history, and he was like filling us in on like the history of Earth Day and how Earth Day kind of started as this way to kind of distract from, you know, more class-based organizing and
Lenin's birthday.
Yeah, the whole like the whole green movement kind of like split off from the left and from, you know, workers' rights and things like that.
So I think we should probably try to wrap this up now. I think I
think this has been very fruitful.
Yeah.
We want to talk more shit about Peter Buffett.
Let's do that. Let's round it out with some shit talk about this guy who got obsessed with you over a video that's gotten about 10,000 views. He's a billionaire.
He
controls a $1 billion foundation. He's not a billionaire person. Well, that's the thing. So like people in our milieus that we run in, you know, one of the common things that people say is like, oh, I just got a Soros check, so I'm going to like, I was protesting. Oh, it's not how it works. Like, it's about like reproducing the ideology that these guys are putting into the world, and understanding that the words that we say and like the ideas that we have in our heads come from somewhere. And they're often authored by people that are paid by these people. And so like, you know, with the Soros check stuff, or, you know, this guy, Peter Buffett, you know, just like it's not about him personally being a billionaire or even making money, because he's not making any money off this. This isn't about his personal like wealth growing. It's about his ideas. He has the power to like spread his ideas. He has this Promethean belief that he has the true ideology and that we all need to like soak it in and do it ourselves.
We're below. We don't understand. Yeah. It's the ideology of ruling. Like, it is the ruling class doing the thing the ruling class does.
Yeah. And I mean, I think he thinks he is funding the revolution. I mean, on his Facebook page the other day, he wrote a quote from somebody, and it says, "Don't try to lead the revolution, seed a revolution." And I think he probably thinks he's doing the best that he can. But the problem is that we always come up against with this guy is that he's not being transparent about what he's doing. Like, at the very least, like, we should have like a say on how his money is spent, or is it just up to him? But that's the thing, is he kind of wants it to just be up to him. I think that billionaires, people of the capitalist class, and their children, and their families don't inherently trust the masses. They have this deep fear, and for good reason. Like, they're exploiting us, you know? Yeah. So like, I think that their big thing is they want to seem, you know, as benevolent and wonderful as possible. The smart ones too, like that. That's why woke culture is like really, amongst many other reasons, like it's so popular, is because they want to endear themselves to the populace.
You need this person. Like, they know all of the woke stuff. They know, they have all the money. They know all the woke stuff. And ultimately, they're going to do the right thing, right?
Right. So like, yeah, that's why it's silly when people get mad at like conservatives. I'm like, conservatives are idiots. They're like losing. The Republicans are losing power right now, because the cutting edge of things is all the most powerful people in the US especially are like, they're Democrats. They're all like progressive Democrats who, you know, speak pronouns and like do land acknowledgements, and
they say there's so much more work to be done. That's like
that's a real hallmark.
That's the beginning. You know how many
Yeah.
times I heard that today?
doing the work.
To round it out, you guys like maybe promote your stuff.
Yeah, I mean, we have a website, spacecommune.com, that has like all the videos listed and all the podcast content listed. And one of Alex's old articles, I pressure him all the time to write more articles because he's very good.
Thanks a ton, you guys, for showing up. To everybody watching, thank you for watching. Follow everybody on Twitter. Links will be in description in the final version. If you would like to help Pact grow, again, leave us a comment, click like, subscribe on YouTube, follow on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Audible, whatever you listen on. Leave us glowing, phenomenal reviews. We appreciate your time. Have a good day.